We've received apologies from Jackie Bland and Erica Redfern.
Okay, Erica's not too well. She's had an operation, but she's recovering at home, and we wish her well. Item 2 then, moving down the agenda, video conferencing and recording. Just to remind you all that we are being recorded, and if the quality is good, then it will be uploaded on our website eventually. And if I could ask you just to remain muted during the course of the meeting to help with the signal quality. So on then to item 3, announcements. A couple of announcements. First of all, we need to do it here at the Public Accountability Board to announce that we have a preferred candidate for our new Chief Constable, Lauren Poultney. And tomorrow I'll be appearing before the Police and Crime panel, as will Lauren, in front of Sue Knowles and the other members of the panel, hoping that they will confirm Lauren's appointment. So that's the business of tomorrow. And then once that's done, if the panel are happy with that, then a whole lot of things will happen in terms of South Yorkshire Police at the top level. So we hope that that goes well tomorrow. The second announcement is to say that we did secure a second round of Safer Streets funding. I think probably most people will be aware of this by now, but £850,000, which is a not inconsiderable sum, for 2 bids. We chanced our arm a little bit and made 2 bids into the fund, and we were successful with both. So £418,000 is going to the Dearne Valley, and this will be for CCTV cameras, number plate recognition cameras, and so on. Sheffield, the Ecclesall Road, Sharrow, Nether Edge, that area of the city will benefit to the tune of £432,000. Again, CCTV, ANPR, work around alley gates and security. So a couple of big bids, some substantial sums of money. I just wanted to place on record my thanks to all those who were involved in putting the bids together. That's our partners in the local authorities that were concerned. For Dearne Valley, that was Barnsley, Rotherham and Doncaster, 3 local authorities. In Sheffield City Council, for the police and to people in my office. These are always very difficult things to get together, get everybody together, but to do it with such tight timescales, tight deadlines, and to have a really good, strong, substantial bid to put in, it is no mean feat. So I do thank everyone and recognise all the hard work that's gone into that. Just before you fall back and relax, we do need to note that round 3 is coming down the track, and we understand that that is likely to be something like £25 million altogether nationally, and we will be invited to make bids into that. And that's specifically around the violence against women and girls agenda. So you've just got time to take your shoes off for 5 minutes, have a gin and tonic, and then think about how we put some more bids together for that next round of Safer Streets funding. I just heard today, a few minutes ago, that next week we're likely to have an announcement around the GRIP funding. That's the money that goes to South Yorkshire Police for work with serious violence. It's Surge Mark II, or son of Surge, or daughter of Surge, I suppose. And that should be announced, I gather, early next week. And we think that'll be about £1 million for SYP. And Sophie may make an announcement a bit later on about what we've recovered by way of spending on coronavirus. I think that's all the announcements I've got, unless somebody else has an announcement of some sort. Shall we then move on to item 4, public questions? I don't think there are any, June, unless you're going to tell me differently. And urgent items, I don't think there are any of those either. And item 6, I don't think there's anything to be considered in the absence of the public and the press. So declarations of interest, are there any that we don't know about and we ought to know about given the contents of this meeting? So shall we come to item 8 then, minutes of the Public Accountability Board held on the 9th of April. This is pages 1 to 10 in the agenda pack. Is everybody happy that those who were present, of course, are you happy that we sign those as a true and correct record of what took place? No one wants to object. Excellent. And then we come to the actions arising from that, page 11, agenda item 9. Looking at that then, the first reference, 396, is about the PSPO, Public Space Protection Order in the Page Hall area. And we've had ongoing negotiations with Sheffield City Council around that. As far as I can see from that, those negotiations are still going on. Tim, I don't know whether there's any update there, or whether it's just with the legal department at
There is, Commissioner. I mean, I know Shelley will talk about Page specifically in her report around Sheffield, but I do know that meetings have now taken place at an operational level to start to scope out that work and take it forward. So it is starting to move, as you're aware, and as I'm sure all colleagues are aware. To get a PSPO involves a consultation process, both in the community and at a political and executive level. It's not something that can be achieved overnight, but things are starting to move in the right direction now. Good.
Oh, that's good news. Good to hear. We'll keep it on, though, Tim, until we've got it secured.
Okay, thank you.
410, a breakdown of domestic abuse arrest rates by category will be provided in future district reports. I think district commanders are trying to reflect something about this in their reports. It may be that we didn't make it clear enough, Kevin, what we were looking for. I think what we were looking for were degrees of risk involved here, so that if we could have some differentiation between the high-risk domestic abuse categories, how successful we are there in taking things through to court or whatever. I think it's that area that we wanted to try and hone down a little on. Tim?
Yeah, Commissioner, this is something that I've been giving quite a lot of scrutiny through force performance days and through quarterly performance reviews. You're aware, I mean, I think in the public's eyes, all domestic abuse is very serious, and the fact that we actually categorise it, may cause some to raise an eyebrow, but domestic abuse, in terms of the way that the police record it, is a very, very broad definition. So it could start at one end with two teenage children having a fight about something in a house that's got out of control to the degree that the parents have called the police. Now that is very different than an ongoing abusive relationship where there's coercive control and the real risk of violence. So quite rightly, we do categorise them, and we do look at arrest rates, because in that latter category, I expect that to be very high. And indeed, if individuals have not been arrested where we've been called to offences of that nature taking place, we have some very pertinent questions as to why. By the same token, where there's two teenagers squabbling, that's not necessarily where I'd expect the police to be taking executive action. So we do monitor it at a variety of different levels, and that data is available and it can be provided, and certainly has been the subject of much discussion at the most recent round of quarterly performance reviews. But the other thing that I am looking at quite a lot at the moment is not just the fact that an arrest has taken place, but the speed and the time it's taken to actually effect that arrest. Because in a high-risk case, as you're aware, the primary aim is safeguarding the victim. And all our experience and professional expertise tells us that the best way to save the victim and break that cycle of abuse is to create a separation that then allows support services to work with that victim to support them through the process. And that early arrest, particularly in those high-risk cases, is absolutely critical. So not only are we looking at the fact of arrest, but we're also looking at the timeliness as well.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, for that. In the light of that, I think I'll probably keep it on, but we'll reword it so that it makes it a little clearer about the sort of thing we're looking for, which might be helpful then to district commanders as they come to write their reports. But thanks for that. 411, that was the police now officer who attended one of our recent pubs. I think perhaps if we ask her to come back in 6 months, see how she's been getting on, that would be of interest to us. I think that's everything under matters arising and actions. So moving then to substantive parts of the agenda, force performance. And what I've done here is I've swapped around items 10 and 11 for reasons that will become clear, I think, so that we're going to start off with the Sheffield District summary. Shelley, I know you're there because we've spoken a few minutes ago. And the part of the reason for swapping them around is because there's been quite a lot of activity, as I'm sure people are aware now through the media, in part of Sheffield around serious crime, drug use, etc. And I think it'd be good to have an update on that, Shelley, and then we can look at the rest of your report.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, an awful lot of enforcement activity that's followed up a 6-month investigation around drug supply that's affecting the Nether Edge, Sharrow and City Centre in Sheffield. And that investigation has been looking at both county lines coming in and going out of Sheffield and the county relating to drug supply. In the enforcement action so far, it's been quite successful. The operational teams have executed 34 warrants. 19 people have been arrested so far. 4 of those already charged and will have appeared at magistrates this morning. We have seized approximately £25,000 in cash. A viable firearm has been recovered. Some ammunition, Class A drugs have been seized as part of the operation. We have safeguarded one vulnerable child that was found at one of the locations where we worked in cooperation with Sheffield City Council and social workers around vulnerability. And also 6 vehicles have been seized. An impactive operation, Commissioner, with about 120 officers involved in total in the enforcement part of the action. And that has included not just South Yorkshire Police, but the NCA and BTP and the Regional Organised Crime Unit, plus the National County Lines Police Coordinator has been involved and down to Sheffield to see the operation in action. So significant really for us, and clearly, Commissioner, this activity is the culmination of a 6-month investigation, but I wouldn't like you to think that these 2 days of action are the end of our activity. That is just a phase within the activity. We will continue to tackle drug supply and organised crime through our Fortify partnership. And in fact, I think whilst we're meeting today, the Fortify partnership are meeting to talk about how we build now the community resilience as a result of the operation that's ongoing, what we look at to do with the neighbourhood and engagement and community safety from here, because clearly the police cannot deal with this alone, and we need our communities on board to support us in either giving information or assisting in diverting young people away from organised criminal activity. So they're the headlines really, Commissioner.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. I'm trying to think whether there's been an operation quite as significant and as big as this in my time. I suspect not. I think it really is something that's had a huge impact and effect. And the degree of collaboration that you've had to put in place there between the different agencies is quite remarkable, and it's having obviously real success. Tim, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just to really sort of support Shelley and what she's saying. I was at the briefing yesterday morning for this phase of the operation, but I've obviously been familiar with it since its inception at the back end of last year. Often I know that you get members of the public talking to you about the need for the police to take action against drugs, drug supply, and obviously that's, a lot of the feedback we get through our neighbourhood engagements is very, very similar. And The purpose of this operation was to have a really concerted investigation into not just the street dealing, but the people who are perpetrating the street dealing and organising it away from the visible drug dealing that people see on the streets. And that takes a long time. It's something that's not seen by the public as it's taking place, and you know, sometimes the activity that you see over the last few days, often the public don't see the huge amount of work that's gone on before. But it's really important, this, because not only does it provide some reassurance to communities that we do take this level of offending really seriously, what it does is safeguard young people, because what we have seen as we've built up our knowledge and understanding of county lines, and there's nothing new in county lines, you know, drugs gangs have been dealing through phone lines and across counties for many, many years. But the phenomenon that we've seen in recent years is this exploitation of vulnerable young people and the associated violence with it. And that's why the partnership approach is so important. So working with the County Lines Coordination Centre, most importantly working with Sheffield City Council, taking advantage of some of the infrastructure that we have in place now around diversionary activity, and taking advantage of the neighbourhood policing structure that can come in and engage with communities on the back of an operation like this. All of that is really important in how we take forward the advantage that today's and yesterday's operation gives us. So I'd just like to really reinforce what Shelley says, and particularly say thank you to the council for all the support that they've given us in the delivery of this operation, and will continue to do so. And also just place on record my thanks to the National Crime Agency and the Yorkshire and Humber Regional Organised Crime Unit for their support in getting us to where we are now. And finally, just reiterate, this is not, you know, here today and that's it. There's lots of work to do with this.
No, I think you're absolutely right. The follow-up, because I've already had members of the public ringing me up from this area saying we would like to help the police, but we are a bit anxious about being seen to do that. So I think to get the word out, there are ways of communicating intelligence information to the police without drawing attention to yourself is part of the ongoing operation and be very important. But you're right. I mean, people do get on to me all the time about drugs and drug dealing in their localities. So I would expect, in fact, it's already begun, I would expect people from other parts of not just Sheffield, but South Yorkshire to say, can't we have something like this where we live? So, yes, great success, but I think there will be ramifications in that way as well.
Perhaps if I just finish off on this point then, and you recall, Commissioner, and I know if we've got members of the media on the call, when we had the dreadful incident in Arbourthorne, where a 12-year-old boy was shot probably nearly 18 months ago now, and something I said when we were dealing with the immediate aftermath of that is the people who perpetrate this sort of violence rely on the public being scared to operate the business. And I hope today shows, and yesterday's operation just illustrates to the community that we are absolutely on their side. But these things are best dealt with by the police and the community working together. And if people want to give us information, we can protect their identity. We do it all the time. And it's really important that we continue to build on that and work with the community.
Thank you. Yes. No, I think this sends out some really strong messages to both our communities and to those criminal gangs as well, that their life is going to be made much more difficult now. But a great success, and thanks to all your officers and yourself, Shelley, as well. Thank you for that. I'm going now to your report then, if I may. And part of the reason for taking you early was because I know there are some people from the media here who won't be here for the whole of our meeting, so I wanted to make sure they knew about the update there. So if I could take you on the Sheffield District report then to page, shall we begin at page 36? We won't look at everything, Shelley. I'll just pick on one or two things and ask you if you could comment on them, and then at the end, if the stuff that you want to draw my attention to, I'm happy for that. So this is page 36, 3.1.2, County Lines Child Criminal Exploitation, and the emerging threats around that. And you've already indicated that there's a lot of coordinated work that's going on. But I just wonder if you could say a word around that County Lines CCE in Sheffield.
Yes, Commissioner. I think probably one of the things to mention is the Amber project in Sheffield. That's our multi-agency service for exploited children. Our South Yorkshire Police have got a team of police officers in there. We've got some specialist social workers, youth workers, and also engagement with health. What they are looking to do as a multi-agency partnership is identify those young people who are at risk of CCE and work extensively, not just child criminal exploitation, but obviously child sexual exploitation, to work with them intensively to reduce the risk around those individuals and some of the choices that they're making. The district with partners hold multi-agency meetings to identify those young people, categorise the risk and decide upon actions to work with them. Now, clearly we've spoken about the Sheffield Fortify Partnership, which looks to tackle organised crime, that includes local authorities and other bodies, including the Regional Organised Crime Unit. They are looking not only at enforcement action that helps to reduce the risk around those young people that are exploited, but we've also found them working in partnership across county boundaries, where we've identified young people that may have been arrested in different areas than South Yorkshire to understand how and who may have been exploiting them, and that work will continue. But in truth, today and yesterday's action also will support our ongoing work to understand the risk around county lines and those individuals that are involved.
Thank you. I notice on page 37, it's towards the end of that section, you're talking about Operation Fortify, and then work with the neighbourhood team and officers in Nether Edge and Sharrow schools. I wondered if at some point in the future we'd have a report back on that as to how that went. I presume it's not happened yet.
Yes, certainly can do that. Some fledgling work there, Commissioner. We have just got a new neighbourhood coordinator from the local authority that is working with the team down there. He has started the work together with the neighbourhood teams to build a neighbourhood action group, reinforce some of the community forums down there, and already some conversations have taken place with heads of some of the local schools about what activity we can do, diversionary, educational or otherwise, with the young people that might be at risk of exploitation. I suppose I should say it's not been chosen to occur particularly in that area, although it's supportive certainly of the enforcement action that we're seeing over these last 2 days. But we are starting that work there to see how that might be replicated across Sheffield in other areas and other schools. But certainly we can bring a report back.
Thank you. And then at 3.13 on that same page, and I think this may be a question for Tim perhaps as well, protecting vulnerable people, investigation capacity. You talk about doubling the numbers of whatever it was, detectives in there. I just wonder what the numbers were and whether this is going to put pressure elsewhere in the organisation if you're able to do this here.
Top of my head,
do you want me
got one specs. Have you got the numbers, Shelley? Because we've put some extra resource into PVP at Sheffield and Doncaster, but it forms part of Uplift, Commissioner.
Okay, so it's not just Sheffield then.
We've allocated some resources out of our Uplift to both Sheffield and to Doncaster. There's more to Sheffield. It's a combination of both detective supervisors, detective sergeants, some detective constables, and some support around the local referral unit as well. Shelley, I haven't got the exact numbers to hand. I don't know whether you have.
Yeah, no.
I think it's 4 sergeants, was it, for Sheffield?
Yeah, so we have 4 teams that cover the operational investigation in our protecting vulnerable people. Those teams each had 1 sergeant. In order to increase the support to the detectives and investigation officers that work within those teams, and because of the workloads that they are carrying and need support with, we've doubled the numbers. So there's 2 sergeants per team. We wanted to do that not just around the workload, but it's obviously clearly an area of risk and specialism. We want to make sure that our officers are supported by the best quality supervision that they can be, and that gives the sergeants more capacity to work actually alongside their staff, to be able to conduct interviews with them, to be able to attend incidents and scenes with them, to support their team's development. So I'm really positive about that. I think it's an excellent move by the force, and our PVP teams are really pleased with that additional supervision. We'll see how that goes, Commissioner. They started on Monday this week.
So it's very, very new.
It is very new.
What we've tried to do, Commissioner, is we've looked at the volume of not just the volume of investigations per investigator, but the volume of investigations per supervisor. Because the teams are a bit bigger at Sheffield and they only have 1 supervisor on, we've tried to even it up across the force. So that's one driver. The other driver is we're putting a lot more emphasis on active supervision, and as that the capacity and the volume of work in that area grows, you just simply need more capacity to be able to provide the requisite level of supervision. And it's not about telling people what to do. It's about supporting our frontline investigators in what is a difficult, complex area of work. It's not just, it stretches everything from child neglect to CSE to rape and serious sexual offending. These are difficult investigations.
Thanks. So moving from protecting the vulnerable to tackling crime, over the page on 38, you reference the armed crime team, and in that first para there, you talk about the areas they'll be operating in, and of course the armed crime team were very much the heart of the centre of what you've just been talking about in Nether Edge and Sharrow and so on. On the next page, on page 39, though, there's a table there in the middle, and I wonder if you could just say a very brief word around that, because I think people in Sheffield would find this quite an interesting statistic, that Sheffield has seen a 27% decrease in the number of firearms discharged during the second half of 2020. I suspect that's not the perception of a lot of people, and all that's in that little panel there would not be the general perception. I don't know what we do about that, but perhaps you could say a brief word.
Yeah, so Commissioner, I think it is worth saying that the armed crime team were brought about as a result of concerns around the firearms discharges that were taking place. Clearly, since the inception of that team, they have done some excellent work in terms of managing investigations when firearms have been discharged. And in the paragraph on that page, it talks about their activity in the first months between January and April, where they've already arrested 80 people linked to firearms offences and executed 30 search warrants. I think the truth is any discharge of a firearm in a public place is alarming and a concern for public safety. We have had a couple of fatalities as a result of firearms discharges. However, the vast majority of those have not ended up in injury to persons, thankfully. And the fact that the armed crime team and their specific operations has managed to identify some of those offenders, complete the complex investigations to link offenders to some of the firearms discharges, have them charged with offences and either currently on a remand or waiting to go to court, has significantly contributed to the success there. So I would say that I understand why the public would be concerned. However, I hope that demonstrates, together with the activity that's taken place over the last couple of days, that we are making every effort to investigate and keep the public safe.
Thanks so much. Tim, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to come in there. Again, you will recall, I'm trying to think back, was it because of COVID, it was perhaps 18 months ago we created the armed crime team. And this is a group of officers that often, the public won't see. It's not the visible policing in communities, but it is really effective in terms of tackling this very, very, very serious level of high-end criminality. And aside from the detectives that work in the armed crime team, you will be aware that we've created extra specialist capability within our firearms unit to be able to operate and make sure that we can operate safely against these individuals that are carrying firearms. We've got proposals to create a road crime team that are specialists in denying criminals the ability to use the strategic road network. And these different units, as we start to grow with us, are really, really important in terms of tackling these people who perpetrate the sorts of incidents that absolutely strike fear in the heart of the community. It's a really impressive effort. It's led by Detective Superintendent Ian Prophet, who has led with DCI Paul Murphy the operation over the last 2 days. It's a really impressive effort, but we'll continue to build on this because we're still just starting to see the benefits of it now. This will continue. I'm absolutely confident of it.
Yeah, thank you. Can we go to page 42, Shirley? So whipping you along a little bit. Residential burglary, which, as you know, is a concern of mine because it's a concern of the public. And I was very interested there in the chart at the bottom of page 42, the table, which shows a drop in residential burglary. I know you created a burglary team, a specialist, at least I think you have. Is some of this the result of their work, would you say?
Absolutely, Commissioner. It is still only a small team of people, but they are dedicated to residential burglary. And by creating that team, we can ensure that every report of residential burglary goes through that team for it to be analysed, for an investigation plan to go onto it, to look at what opportunities we've got to detect that particular burglary, to look how it may link with other similar burglaries in the area. And clearly, as a result of doing that and having much, much clearer oversight by a single individual in a small team, that has built their capacity really, which is demonstrated through this, because certainly from February to May this year, we have seen a reduction of 45% in our residential burglaries. Clearly, I hope that we can maintain that and sustain it over time. And we've also managed to improve our outcomes in that time too. We would always still like to improve outcomes in terms of burglary and bringing offenders to justice, because, as you say, this is where offenders enter people's homes. It's really intrusive crime and particularly upsetting. But we're pleased with how the team is operating so far, and certainly from my point of view, I intend to ensure that they've got the resources there to continue the really good work that they're doing.
Do you have any figures for outcome rates?
So our outcome rate between February and March was just under 10%, which was an improvement by a half. Clearly now we would want that to be higher, but we're certainly starting to move in the right direction. And part of this is the ability to link those offences by the scrutinised oversight we've got now.
Okay, thank you. If anybody else wants to chip in, do it. And I'm not sure whether the hand raising facility, I can see it on my screen, possibly not. You may have to just shout up. I'm on to page 49 now, Shelley, if I can. Page 4, the Shycliffe team. And again, I wonder if you could say a word around that, because that has been an area that's exercised a lot of comment from the public, both in the media and to myself, to my office. And you've obviously been doing a lot of work there too, with some good results, I think.
Yes, Commissioner, the team are really well known now in the Page Hall area. In terms of crime statistics in Page Hall, it is relatively low. It is around the perception, the numbers of people and some of the antisocial behaviour that takes place there that causes the greatest concern. Clearly, the team are working now with the embedded community manager from the local authority. They are still in the process of getting the community house open. The premises identified. They're just still going through some of the risk assessments and liability insurances that are required for different multi-agency partners to work from that location, but that's going well. The team, even though it's a small team since January, and you've got the data there in the report, have processed 66 suspects throughout that time. They've issued a number of motoring related tickets around nuisance vehicles and vehicles without insurance at that location. They've done a large number of stop and searches, and successfully so. Their outcome rate in terms of a positive find of those searches has been 35% of the searches have been completed. Officers have found items. That is mostly around possession of personal use drugs. And ultimately they continue to work there with the neighbourhood wardens from the council, with the community manager, and only I think in the last couple of weeks they've had the first multi-agency operational meeting around the potential for the public space protection order down there. So in terms of policing and partnership working, it's going fairly well, I would suggest.
Thank you. I'm looking at the paragraph which is the penultimate on page 49. It talks about diverting young people from harm is one of the team's main priorities, etc. Then it talks about going into schools on parents' evenings, which I thought was a really good idea, because where do parents ever get together and gather in? Well, parents' evening is the obvious one. I must say, my own experience, parents' evening was the equivalent of going to the dentist, but I guess some parents quite enjoy it with their infants. I just wondered whether parents' evenings are going to happen in the future, because many have moved to being remote, haven't they?
Yeah. So there's a couple of the teams that are looking at how they can engage better with schools, and absolutely you're right. Where do people go? They go to schools to pick their children up or for any other meetings. So the North East team are collaborating with Chaucer School around how that looks, and particularly to support excluded children when they're reintroduced back into school for support to parents. And that is going well. And then in the South East team, it is Park Academy. It's Tom Holland's Manor team that have been meeting with parents at any gatherings there. They've got the offer from the school of a room where they can meet in private with any parents or any members of the public who would like to raise issues with the policing team. They've done a couple of those meetings so far and have more planned, and the school's been really supportive of that.
That's very good indeed. I'm rushing you on. It's not because I'm not interested in the neighbourhood team.
I understand.
There's a lot of information there about what they're doing, and I do receive some of those reports being a Sheffield resident, so I know some of that. But taking you to page 56, just very briefly there, in fact, it's only a comment I've written on my own papers because it comes out of what you were saying there. I've had some councillors approach me about dark nights. It seems a long way away, but they're already thinking about that in different parts of Sheffield, not just the Abbeydale corridor, but Darnell, but Shire Green as well. Some of the local councillors are saying, can we please have early conversations with the police around that, because there are things we as a community would like to say to you in advance. I just assumed you always did, but they have said that in the last few days, so I pass that on. Yes,
thank you, Commissioner. I've spoken to the Chief Inspector who leads our locality teams in the neighbourhoods. We are just ensuring that we are geared up properly for the opening or potential opening again through the nighttime economy with COVID. They're the plans that we're concentrating on at the moment, but towards the end of the summer we are going to meet with partners early around what those dark nights plans look like to ensure that we've got good diversionary activities, parental support around dark night, and also our understanding is that dark night periods also is likely to be when there is the large G26 meeting, which may require some of our resources. So we need to work hard with our partners to plan early to ensure that we've got everything in place. So yes, definitely leave us with that. And if there are any councillors or partners in particular that have written to you, please let me know so that I can point our Chief Inspector in their direction to ensure that we capture any concern.
Yep, we'll certainly do that. Thank you very much for that. Well, thank you for the report, Shelley. As I say, I've not really done justice to it. There's such a lot in it, but it was all of interest, and I have noted it. So thank you very much indeed for that. Tim, did you want to say anything in conclusion of that report, or?
The only thing I was going to add, Commissioner, just in relation to dark nights, just to reiterate and build on what Shelley says, there'll be a force-wide plan and a force lead that will coordinate all the local plans to make sure that we've got a properly thought through, evidence-based problem-solving approach across everything from, you expect to see an increase in burglary, early evening burglary at that time of year. You tend to see an increase in robbery, late evening. You tend to see an increase in antisocial behaviour. So there'll be a force-wide plan with a local focus that encompasses all of that. And that will lead into particularly the issues around Halloween and bonfire nights, that some of the behaviour that we have witnessed in the last couple of years, that we're going to have a properly thought through multi-agency plan to tackle some of that, because I think some of the scenes we saw in certain areas of Sheffield, particularly last year, need to be prevented this year.
Okay, thanks so much, Tim. Can I turn then to item 10, which is the Doncaster District summary? And Mel, I think I saw you on the list in Doncaster. First of all, thank you very much for the report. Again, I'll just pick on one or two things, if I may, and then at the end, if there's stuff that you want to comment on that I haven't done, you could come in. Just by way of overall comment, Mel, it seemed to me that some of the things we've just been hearing about from Sheffield, particularly around organised crime, drugs and so on, you've got there, well, they're across the whole of the county, but you've got them there in abundance as well in Doncaster. And I'm very aware when I read the Chief's log every day, as I do, that Doncaster features almost as much as anywhere else in the county, if I can put it that way. In other words, the demand on services in Doncaster, policing services in Doncaster, seems to be really high. The pressures on you seem to be very considerable. Now, I don't know whether you want to comment on that particularly, but it's just an observation I would make, that there do seem to be some really big issues in the Doncaster district that are really quite serious and do need a lot of resourcing.
Yeah, you're right to raise that, sir. There is a high demand in Doncaster. We've seen some significant issues in relation to organised criminality since the shooting in January. Not all related to that. We talk about Mexborough on quite a regular basis. I don't want to tempt fate, but there's been a lot of work done in Mexborough to alleviate some of the problems, and a great partnership response, not only in relation to that sort of pursue element of the structure, but also looking at some of the early intervention. So that has reduced significantly, and I know you, sir, have had responses from members of the public in Mexborough commenting on some of the improvements in the field within the community at that location. We see challenges in Edlington, as you will be aware, but more recently we've seen a particular challenge in relation to organised criminality, which has been quite sporadic across the borough, but probably linked to two feuding organised crime groups in particular. But actually the sporadic nature of that and the spread of that, rather than it being focused in the community like a lot of the work that Shelley's just described, can be quite challenging in relation to resourcing. But we have seen some great work in relation to some of that activity, with two persons currently on remand in relation to a particular incident where a firearm was discharged and a person injured, but also lots of work and development around trying to increase what you described as allowing the public and communities to help in that fight by particular use of Crime Stoppers. Now, we've seen particular use of Crime Stoppers in certain areas within Doncaster, and we are just awaiting an evaluation in relation to that activity to see what actually the outcome of that work was, to see actually how we refocus that work, and taking into account the point that you make, sir, that communities are really wanting to help but are understandably fearful of any repercussions that might come from that.
Okay, thank you. Your report is divided along the lines of the police and crime plan, so we're looking at protecting vulnerable people as one of those priorities. I'm looking at page 16, Mel, which is around domestic abuse, and I'm at paragraphs 3.12, round about there. You talk about MATAC. I wonder if you could just explain MATAC and how that works and whether indeed it's working. And also in 3.13, you talk about an IDVA being located with the police domestic abuse team. I presume that isn't an IDVA, but we have IDVAs.
No, it's the group of IDVAs, and I know I'll talk about the MATAC first. The multi-agency tasking and coordinating structure is a process that has been recently introduced across South Yorkshire, and it really looks to tackle the offending behaviour in looking at actually what is causing that offender to be involved in domestic abuse and tackling those behaviours, as opposed to the MARAC, which looks more at the multi-agency risk assessment conference, which looks at protecting the victim. And I'm really passionate about the way in which we stop offenders offending, which obviously impacts not only on independent victims, but on multiple victims that can be subject of these offences. What's really important in the MATAC process is, because when you look at it, 12 nominals might not seem very many if you take into consideration how many domestic abuse incidents we have. But what is really important in that offender management process is that actually services and multi-agency individuals are able to have an impacted response on offenders. So for me, focusing on a small number and having an impact really important. It's probably too early in the day to assess actually the impact of that, because it is quite new, and I'd be quite happy to report at the next PAB in relation to possibly some case studies around the matter and the response from the partnership, and actually the impact on the offending behaviour of those individuals. Because as you can imagine, it can take some time to actually monitor offending behaviour over time, but I'd be quite happy to bring that back.
Yeah, I think we'd be interested in that and how that goes. It's not quite prevention, is it? But it's preventing any further action or behavioural action on their part.
Yeah, it does require offending to trigger obviously involvement in that process. But like you say, it does seek to reduce repeat offending. And not only the offending against the victim, but also the impact on the family. And the rest of the entry in relation to domestic abuse talks about that broader partnership approach, so that whole family approach at addressing domestic abuse behaviour. And we talk about being trauma-informed and understanding the impact that domestic abuse not only has on the victim in particular, but also on the wider family and the future outcomes for those individuals. Okay. You're absolutely right in relation to the IDVA. As when pre-COVID, we had not all the IDVAs were co-located at Doncaster, but a number of the IDVAs were co-located to work alongside our domestic abuse team to ensure that appropriate support to victims, but also to support victims who are going through the criminal justice process, to encourage them to have the strength and support not only through the journey to court, but also within court to prosecute offenders. So as COVID restrictions lift, we are keen to bring that IDVA support back into the police station, working more closely with the domestic abuse team. And I think it's worth recognising at this point, sir, that your office have been particularly supportive as we've seen increased numbers of domestic abuse within COVID, to provide some additionality in relation to that support function, which is often what makes the difference between long-term and sustained protection of the victim and their ability to make progress and make a new life for themselves and their family.
Yeah, absolutely. Was that someone else wanted to come in, or no? Can I move you then to Mel to page 18 now? This is another acronym, MACE, MACE on page 18, and looking at paras 3.19 onwards. Child exploitation. I wonder if you could say something about MACE and how that works. Yeah. And then as I look down the page, I can see reference to the Philomena protocol. I wonder if you could explain what that is.
Yeah, so in relation to the multi-agency child exploitation process, that really looks at all child exploitation, including CSE and criminal exploitation, and looks to ensure that we assess children who come to the partnership's attention in a consistent model. And this is a assessment tool that's used across the force and nationally. Mr. Forber earlier talked about the wider network in relation to exploitation and evaluation of county lines. But this really looks to assess children based on the different aspects that present, to identify those children who are in greater need of support and intervention. So that's what the MACE process does. It's a multi-agency assessment that also then looks at putting interventions in a bespoke approach around that child to intervene in any exploitation that they are suffering, but also to provide some support around them and their family and their care network to try and prevent further exploitation further down the line. And they work with with a team of staff who are based in the local authority, but work alongside our officers, doing some outreach work with families and schools, which hopefully, as schools start to open up, we'll be able to go forward into that more face-to-face approach, which looks to broaden awareness with children and families in relation to the signs to look for to identify exploitation or attempts to exploit before it actually takes hold. In relation to the Philomena Protocol, it really comes on the back of a lot of work that's been done nationally and really trying to understand the reasons young people go missing, but also, and it's particularly around those children who are looked after children who are in the care of the local authority, and really trying to identify an intelligence picture which seeks to look at their needs so that the placement that they are put in meets their needs to avoid them actually running away from that location. It also looks to try and establish some early intervention from the placement where they are being looked after, so that early inquiries can be made to try and return that child back to that location without police intervention. And the reason for that is recognising that actually these children who need support, interacting with the police on a regular basis is not necessarily the best thing to seek their cooperation and ongoing sort of support to make them happy where they are. But it also looks to identify actually what are the locations that they are going to and what's taking them to that location.
So who's it who's signed up for the protocol? Is that the homes or the local authority or the police or everybody?
It's a whole partnership approach, and it's interesting you raise the homes, because the homes vary depending on their ownership and whether they are owned by the local authority or whether they are private homes. So a lot of this relies on the cooperation of the local authority, which obviously isn't difficult to get, but some of the private homes, obviously, some of these protocols mean increased resilience within those locations and an ability for them to go out and possibly make inquiries as to where the children are, should they know where they are.
Yeah.
But it's really about working in partnership to do what's best for the outcome for that child.
I mean, these are obviously very vulnerable, potentially very vulnerable children if they're going missing. And I notice in the final paragraph on that section that in 2019-20, the percentage of young people missing from from children's homes was 53%. And in 2020-2021, it was 84%. I mean, that's a big jump. I wonder if there's an explanation for that.
Yeah, it is a big jump. It is worth noting, like I mentioned in the following sentence, that a lot of those are down to multiple missing episodes. So what that means is it's the same child going missing time and time and time again. Now, what we have seen in recent years is a move away from the position that we saw historically, where there was a big emphasis on putting children in secure accommodation. There's been a move away from that now for a number of reasons, but in the main because it appears that putting a child in secure accommodation doesn't necessarily change their behaviour or address the issues, and actually what the tendency to do now is to work more closely with that child to try and support them in developing and growing and give a little bit more opportunity for them to adapt to their surroundings and to be a better outcome, because outcomes weren't always great from the secure accommodation. But in addition to that, we are looking to re-emphasise the need for the placements to actually take some personal responsibility ahead of contacting the police to make inquiries where this is not about children who are being exploited, but where children are pushing the boundaries or staying out late, and rather than ringing the police straight away just for us to go and recover children back to that location. But like I said, this comes with some input and training to those homes around risk assessment to make sure that children aren't left vulnerable, and actually that those that really need to be reported to police due to significant concerns around things like exploitation are reported immediately, and the home takes intervention action itself in appropriate situations.
Okay, thank you. I'm moving to page 22, and I know we've talked a little around this already, but this is there's a focus here on work in Mexborough, Conisborough, and so on. I just wonder whether you could say a little bit about how you talk to the communities here, how you reassure those communities when things happen, because we know there are organised crime groups at work here, and communities have been greatly unsettled by things that have happened and are happening.
Yeah. So in particular in the area of Mexborough and Conisborough, I have a working relationship with the councillors out there, and especially in the early stages where we had the significant activity back in January, we're in regular contact with keeping them updated in relation to activity. Adrian Luscombe, who's our neighbourhoods inspector for Mexborough and Conisborough, is a long-standing inspector out there and has regular contact with not only the councillors but also direct with the community. We utilise community alerts in relation to providing information to people and see really good responses in relation to the relevance of the alerts, rather than alerts just being sent out sort of willy-nilly. So it really is important that they are relevant to keep people's attention. But also we've seen increases in use of online packed meetings, which across the borough has actually seen improved attendance at partnership and communities together meetings, because actually it's easier for people to access them online. But as we move forward with lifting restrictions, it's important, and we have started to do this, which is start to bring back the face-to-face contact that certain members of the community really do need and really do value. But also our PCSOs are out and about on a regular basis and often reporting and chat with the community to understand what the community feeling is and to make sure we do that engagement. But in relation to the localities model, what that also brings on board is partnership agencies who are also out in the communities and engage with individuals in relation to what their perceptions are, what their understandings are, and what their issues are.
So that's the clear, hold, build strategies that you refer to. Is
the localities model is actually across the borough. The clear, hold, build strategy is actually specific to Mexborough in relation to it being identified as a key area to sort of trial that approach, which is a slightly different to the 4P approach, but actually looks to build the resilience of communities. And we've worked with partners in the local authority for each area to take a responsibility around the clear, hold, build. So the clear bit is really the pursue element that the police follow. And then the hold is actually how do you establish that sort of situation where you're not getting any offending anymore. I know you're always going to get some offending, but the build really is for me the really important part of it, which is owned by the local authority, because what that looks to do is to build the strength and resilience of communities and to build their own expectations and knowledge of what they can achieve in their lives. And it's more of a whole life outcome as opposed to just about criminality, so that people's expectations rise and therefore the community expectations rise, and then they start to work together as a community, and therefore they start to almost start to challenge some of that criminality within their own area, and just build strength at every level.
Okay. Tim, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, it was just on your point about engagement and feeding back to the community, Commissioner. I mean, it's interesting really in that over the COVID period, particularly through lockdown, we've actually seen measures of confidence increase. And I think probably it'll take time to understand that and the impact that COVID has had on that. But our neighbourhood teams have very quickly had to adapt in terms of using online engagement. Quite a lot of use has been made of things like Facebook Live. We've realigned some of our forced use of Twitter, and a re-emphasis on the development of community alerts. But the last round of quarterly performance reviews, which had taken place roughly over the election period, I was doing them, one of the questions that I asked of every district, and every district did a presentation on, was how will they learn the lessons of engagement through COVID to develop a more comprehensive engagement strategy at a local level as we move out of lockdown. And the net effect of that now is that at a neighbourhood level, they've all developed a plan that encompasses things such as touchdown points, pop-up police stations, all the stuff we used to do, if I can call it that, a properly thought through online strategy, better use of community alerts, as well as some of the more traditional stuff around newsletters. What I've encouraged all the neighbourhoods to do is think about the mosaic data for the particular neighbourhood, the population demography, and make sure that it's tailored specifically to that. So I'm really keen to build on that upsurge in confidence that we've seen throughout the COVID period as we move back into an element of normality, hopefully.
Thanks very much. I'm whipping on now to page 23, Mel. Speeding vehicles. It's a couple of paras down from the top. This is a big issue for me. It came up. It's been bubbling away for some time now during the coronavirus period, and certainly during the elections. The number of communities, particularly in the Doncaster district, because you've got so many of these little scattered small communities, villages and the like, where speeding vehicles was a matter of great concern, and general road safety, I think. I think it's something that I'm going to have to sort of put my mind to more and more in the coming months, because, and it's very difficult when you say to people, well, you know, there isn't the evidence for speeding vehicles through your village. There aren't certainly not the injuries that you might suspect and so on. People say, well, it's not about that, it's about feeling safe as much as being safe, and we don't feel safe. I think these just are very difficult issues to get to grips with. My question, though, is around, I think, roads policing, whether that's just so stretched now. I think you referenced this a little bit, Tim, at the beginning, but whether we are able to meet the needs of these people who want more roads policing, who want more cameras down their village more often and so on, catching the speeding motorists. I don't know whether that's a more general question for you, Tim, or a specific one for Doncaster.
It probably is a more general question, Commissioner. I mean, in terms of our road policing unit, predominantly, I think that part of the issue is that predominantly they're focused on the strategic road network. They are focused around the broad tasking around stolen vehicles, and communities, in particular in the villages that surround our conurbations throughout South Yorkshire, don't necessarily see or feel the benefit of that. I think, if we're thinking about this in the broader term, it's beyond simple enforcement. I think you have to think about it in terms of what does road design and traffic calming measures look like? What does the fixed camera network look like? What does our mobile speed enforcement camera network look like? What do things like community speed watch and how can it be more effectively delivered through our neighbourhood teams in our more rural communities? So I think there's a broad. I don't think it's necessarily a roads policing issue. Roads policing officers are very highly trained and have a particular function, and obviously speed enforcement is part of that, but it's far broader than that as well. So I think that, as we take it forward, there's probably something that we can think about in terms of a more holistic approach to speeding, particularly I think in those villages that surround our conurbations, which is where I suspect this is more acutely felt, because within the towns there's generally at any accident hotspot there tends to be fixed speeding cameras, which tends to ameliorate the issue. The motorway network, obviously throughout much of the M1 we've got a fixed camera network and variable speed limits, and it tends to be those outlying areas that don't necessarily have a camera. And it doesn't have to be people driving particularly dangerously. I think if someone comes to a small village at 40 miles an hour instead of 30 miles an hour, that in itself particularly if you try to walk down narrow roads with young children, is what strikes that fear in the hearts of people. So I think there are things we can do, but I don't think it's necessarily as simple as a road policing investment.
No, you're right. And I have a conversation with the Safety Camera Partnership people in the near future as well. So I think it's something we need to look at and return to, perhaps over the later summer, something like that. We'll have another look at it. But it is an issue that's bubbled away for a while, and it's suddenly it's something that every parish council, every community group across the Doncaster district, it seems, wants to talk about. So just to alert you, I suppose. The last thing, Mel, that I got was on page 28. It returns to where we began, really, with most serious violence. And I was just anxious to see the graph at the bottom there, which does seem to indicate that you do have a problem here of rising criminality. And I just wonder whether, again, I don't know whether this is a question I'm asking to the senior command team as much as yourself, but does this suggest that you need an armed crime team in Doncaster, or you need the armed crime team?
I think in relation to the increasing more serious violence, you'll note, sir, that the numbers are relatively small because this actually does only measure quite a tight amount of offences which are detailed in the document. So the numbers are relatively small, so it can seem like large fluctuations.
It was the fact the graph was going up that was.
It as it details there, the likelihood is that that's been, well, it has been significantly impacted by the organised crime activity that I described earlier on in the meeting in relation to some of that activity. I think in relation to the armed crime team, absolutely I would welcome a similar structure that would cover Doncaster. I think obviously the focus of it has been in Sheffield. It's suffered some significant criminality probably in the last couple of years, and Shelley illustrated the impact that the armed crime team had in that vicinity. I think some of this is actually looking at the priorities and just making difficult decisions about where those resources sit. And I'm sure if we continue to see the reductions in Sheffield that we're seeing, then there'll be further conversations about whether that team can be increased in size to take on board some of the activity in Doncaster. But I also don't want to take away from the work that my reactive team and my Fortify team do to try and keep on top of this activity. And it is something that is subject to a specific focused activity locally to try and address the criminality that we think has led to that increase.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Well, we'll leave the question hanging in the air as well. So, but thank you. And thanks very much for the report, Mel, and all the best for the summer period as we come out of lockdown in Doncaster.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I'm on the agenda again. I'm now at under forced performance at item 12, which is, Tim, your report on protecting vulnerable people. Again, we'll just drop in on one or 2 points if we may. Just a general point, Tim. There's an awful lot of acronyms in this report, more than I've ever seen in a long time. So there's a piece of serious recidivism going on here, I think, because I thought we'd managed to get rid of them, but they've all cropped up again. But anyway, PIP 1, PIP 2, I'm not sure what all that means to the general public. So page 60, if we can start with that one. And I think we may have Graham Jones from the Violence Reduction Unit on the call as well.
Yeah, I am.
Graham, I don't know whether you want to say a general word about how we tackle domestic abuse, how we get ahead of the game, more about the preventive work. Just a little word about what's going on to reassure.
Well, I think the most significant development recently has been the domestic abuse campaign that was launched in the last few weeks. That's had some very, very good coverage across South Yorkshire from the press. We got a lot of support from them, and the whole rationale for that is to encourage people to report to the stories of, if people have seen them, as animations which are true life stories of people who were experiencing domestic abuse but managed to move out and get support and change their lives. And so it's about those kind of steps, really, about encouraging people to think that there are services there they can to go to. So that's one part of it. And certainly what we'll be doing is looking to see if there is, what we'd be looking for is an increase in referrals to the domestic abuse support services across South Yorkshire that would indicate to us that more people were taking up the opportunities they were there. So that's one part of it. And it's been very well supported by groups and by the force in terms of sharing it more widely, and it is getting a lot of coverage. So it's one part of it. It's saying, it's a safer place to report and domestic abuse now than ever in all sorts of ways. And there are services, the police response and the services response is there, and encouraging people to take that next step.
Thank you. Tim, did you want to say anything around that?
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate what Graham says, really, it's that, when I talk about the importance of early arrest, it's not the arrest in itself, it's that opportunity to put space between the victim and the perpetrator, to enable professional help to be put in place to give people confidence. Because if you arrest someone, whether they go through the court system or not, if you can't break that cycle of abuse, that's when it just continues, in far too many cases. So it's not just the arrest, it's about that gap that you put between the victim and the perpetrator. And then it's the activity that Graham talks about there that can support victims, I'll choose my words very, very carefully, to create that gap, to break the cycle of abuse, to have the confidence to step away from that abuse. And certainly the domestic abuse matters training that we talked about before, and that's still being rolled out across the force, but has been delivered to a huge number of frontline officers now. Absolutely at the heart of that training is making sure that our frontline police officers understand that, the importance of that gap and the importance of that support to break the cycle of abuse.
Yeah, thank you. I'm turning to page 62 now, another acronym, RASO, Rape and Serious Sexual Offending. I'm at the bottom of the page, and you talk there about a RASO gatekeeper, and I just wondered if you could say a word about the role of the RASO gatekeeper. I think it's very new, isn't it?
It's not that new as a role. What this is about, I mean, there's a lot of concern nationally about that report to conviction rate in terms of rape and serious sexual offences, and rightly so, because too many offences do not result in a justice outcome. What that gatekeeper's role, it allows us to deliver a level of consistency in terms of the way that we investigate these crimes and the way that we put case files together to then send to the CPS for an assessment as to whether to charge them. So it's a really important role for us because and it's part of the broader PVP setup. If I take you back to 2017, when we evolved protecting vulnerable people teams out to districts, one of the things that we've always wanted to avoid was an element of a postcode distinction in terms of the level of service you get or the quality of investigation that you get. So the RASO gatekeeper role, and indeed it's a small team now, sit within central PVP governance to ensure that there's consistency around that. And it allows us to, if there are lessons learned, if there are common deficiencies coming up in investigations, it allows us to recirculate that learning, both back to officers directly, but into our broader training in this area as well.
Yes, it is an area of concern, this one, and the low level of convictions in rape cases, it's something that is concerning people nationally. I've got a lot of groups who are on to me all the time about this, and I completely understand it. I mean, are you able to? I think there's probably not one answer to this. There are lots of things that have to be done, and that makes it more difficult, because it may be that in the 10 things you've got to do, a couple of them are really critical and the others are important but not critical. I don't know whether you've got any sense of that. Where critically is this going on?
If you take, if I can describe the journey, if you take rape as an offence, thankfully, rape offences where the victim and the perpetrator are completely not known, that it's a total stranger attack. They are very, very, very rare. The majority of these offences are where parties are known. That then brings into play a whole raft of third-party material now that has to be disclosed, and you will know from what you've read in the press and through the circulations through the APCC and some of the conversations we've had in the past, the challenges around disclosure make these crimes far more complicated to investigate than they ever were. And I think that's been a learning journey for the police in terms of, looking at digital forensics, looking at how we gather third-party material. So has allegations been reported to or picked up by adult social services, for example? All that material has to be gathered and disclosed and analysed. And that makes them far, far more complicated to investigate. And there's far more loopholes and far more things that can be exploited from a defendant's perspective than was perhaps the case 20 years ago. And it's really important that we maintain one central team to provide us with a level of quality assurance around investigations. Two, that we have a real quality working relationship with the Crown Prosecution Service, and that we're constantly working with the CPS to improve our training and our level of knowledge around how we bring these complicated cases to court. But it's also important that we make sure that we've got the right, that we work properly with the right support services to make sure that it's not just the investigation, it's the support that's provided for the victim is absolutely right and meets their needs. So you'll see it, and this is the latest way that we're taking this forward under Detective Superintendent Dave Carley, who runs our PVP governance team. We've just put an extra detective constable post into our central team, and we've created, or we're in the process of creating external scrutiny panels. So when we've got a case that isn't going to result in a charge, we can then go back with detectives, with the CPS, with sexual violence advocates and other people involved in that process to have a look at review, have a look at it, review it, see if there's any lessons that can be learned, see if we need to think about how we're structured in the future to try and continually learn the lessons, because it's a constantly evolving area of work. There is no simple answer. What I can assure you is that we have teams of detectives who are absolutely committed to supporting victims, absolutely committed to getting judicial outcomes and getting justice for victims where we can do that. But it is a challenging area of work, and there's no getting away from that.
Yeah, and it must be very dispiriting if you've got officers who are absolutely committed and work their socks off, and still we can't get the rate of convictions up for no fault of theirs, but for other factors, of which there may be many. You began by making a distinction between stranger rape and the rape within familiar partnerships. Do we have any figures for those?
Not off the top of my head, but what I can tell you is that where people, and I've dealt with them before as a senior detective, where someone, where it's a complete stranger attack, they're very, very rare, very rare. A lot of these are people where they've met. Well, there's a whole range of different offences. It'd be impossible to start, but where people are acquainted or known to each other in somewhere, and that can range from rape and sexual violence within a marriage through to someone who they've met that evening, through to a whole range of different circumstances. What I will say is this: is that when I draw a distinction in terms of the type of offending, what I'm not drawing a distinction between is the seriousness and the impact of offending, because these sorts of offences and the impact they have on a victim, irrespective of the circumstances in which they arise, are absolutely profound, and we as a force are absolutely committed, no matter what the circumstances, to supporting victims.
No, I think it was more I was casting around in my mind for yet further explanations for the different conviction rates.
In some ways, I mean, again, from a personal perspective, having investigated and I am going back some years when I was a detective superintendent and a senior investigating officer. Because stranger attacks particularly are dependent on purely forensics in many, many ways, and if you prioritise the forensics and get them, they're actually easier to prove. They're easy to prove. Where there are other extraneous factors that come in that make them more difficult to investigate.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Turning to page 64, this is CSE. Been talking to Rotherham Borough Council, its chief exec and leader recently. I wanted to reassure them that CSE remains an absolute priority for both myself and South Yorkshire Police. I think that's something that we do need to do. In that paragraph 3.23, you make reference to an overarching child sexual exploitation strategic profile. I wonder whether I don't think my office have seen that. Would it be possible to see that, Tim?
Yeah, I'm sure we can facilitate that. Absolutely.
Okay.
What I would say though is that mention has been made in the press recently about intelligence profiles around CSE.
Yeah.
These are confidential documents that contain much intelligence information around how we investigate these, but we can certainly have a discussion about that.
Yeah, okay. No, I think the public needs to see that we are doing things, even if sometimes there are things that can't be disclosed to the public in quite that way.
Just let me say this, is that the investigation and the identification of child sexual exploitation, and to be fair, the criminal exploitation of children as well, is an absolute priority for this force. We have considerable dedicated resources established, both from investigating it when allegations are reported to us, but also, and again I've talked about in the report here, some of the proactive measures that we take, both in terms of speaking with schools, Operation Make Safe, the use of abduction notices, and the use of a range of proactive measures to protect young children. We're absolutely committed to it, and that will continue unabated. What's really important, and you referenced Rotherham, is that the police cannot deal with this alone. It's absolutely vital that we maintain those both strategic and tactical partnerships with colleagues in the local authority, third sector organisations such as Bernardo's. Really, really important in terms of as our cohesive approach to what's is an absolutely dreadful crime.
Yeah, thank you. Page 71, finally from me. This is Atlas and all that goes on there, and I was confused, I think, by what on earth is going on here now, because it's 3.73, the portal, and then a reference to something called a chatbot facility, which I've not heard of before. I can hear my grandchildren groaning that I don't know what a chatbot is. But I wonder if you could unpack that a little bit for me.
My teenage girls will be groaning as well. In essence, this relates to our ability to be able to talk to people online. So principally, if you want to call the police, you can email us or you can phone us. It's really important that we create different channels for people to talk to us. We do have an online portal now, and you can see in paragraph 3.2 the use of that so far. But there are further areas of that to be deployed and embedded. And as you're aware, Smart Contact is not just a system that we've procured on our own, it's part of a joint procurement with Humberside Police, who are yet to go fully live with it. So paragraph 3.73 relates to that.
So there's a fair bit of alternative communication going on there, not just 101 now. It's the public are getting used to other ways.
Absolutely, and this is a challenge for the police because often people call us when there's a problem, and when people have a problem, they tend to go on to speak to someone. That's human nature, and you know, the police will never be able to encompass online contact in the way that Amazon can, for want of a comparison. But there are many tasks that people can do online, and if they do it online, not only will it be a more efficient answer for them, it will mean that it creates capacity within the organisation to further improve. And you know, you're aware that we've seen significant improvements for 101 service over the last 12 or 18 months. It will create further capacity for us to be able to improve that. And what we want to do is give people a range of ways to contact us. So, you know, there will be a full ability to be able to do it in a range of different online ways in the future.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Tim. I think that's everything I wanted to ask on that report, but thank you for it. Again, there's a lot of information for us in there, but if you can just note the point I made at the beginning about acronyms, that would be very helpful, I think, going forward.
I shall sort that for you next time, Commissioner.
Otherwise, I'll think of an acronym for it. Right, thank you. I'm on to item 13. This is Chief Executive Reports. First of all, I'm not sure that Anne is here from the Independent Ethics Panel Exception Report. Yes, Anne, we've got you somewhere, I think, but you're muted.
Yeah.
I wonder whether you wanted to say a word.
Well, we have a new, can you hear me now? Yeah?
Yep, we can.
Yeah, we have a new panel now. So what we're doing at the meetings is having a briefing for the new panel in ahead of the meeting. So we had a briefing on use of force, and then we had the use of force report, which was very, very interesting, very detailed, and we could provide assurance on the basis of that certainly looking at gender, ethnicity and the tactics used, they were consistent and there was no proportionality identified. We were concerned about the use of force in 2 instances with children, but we were totally reassured by them and that social services were involved. Stop and search. We had some concerns about levels of scrutiny, but we've picked this up as a panel until it's about scrutinising the body-worn video, because the new report suggests that should be routine in future. So there'll be issues about having the correct level of security scrutiny for people doing it. So in the interim, the members of the panel are doing it. We've done 2, and we've got another one organised in 2 weeks' time. We did a general one in September. We did one with selecting minority stop and searches in December, and we've got another one planned for 2 weeks' time. And the other thing was fixed penalty notices. A really good system Inspector Usher had set up, and we've now done 2 inspections with Kevin from your office, Commissioner, and really the paperwork set up so that it's formally audited. We see this, so we're really looking at the kind of COVID incidents, and they've all been very proportionate. We've been very impressed by the patience of officers. Because they've been sometimes in quite difficult situations with people in different levels of inebriation, but they've dealt with them very well and very professionally. And And the other work was about the internal ethics committee has been set up for SYP. And we had an I attended the introductory meeting, and I'm doing some training with them because I was involved with Shelley previously in delivering the training. And we're having some more discussion about how the two committees could work together on occasions. And I think and we've now allocated lead members to the new members of the committee, and they're there for everyone to see, and we're having kind of handover process at the moment.
Thank you. And despite all the difficulties of virus and remote working and all of that, the new panel is getting together and gelling a little bit.
Yes, I think we are, and we're getting some work done, outside of the meetings, which in some ways is, and creating some relationships with the force, which I think is quite important.
Absolutely. No, I think that's really good. Well, thank you very much for that, Anne. You've obviously been busy and doing a lot of things. Tim, you've popped up.
It's just to reiterate the point around stop and search. We are very keen to get more of the body worn video, subject to independent scrutiny, and really welcome Anne's comments on that. From our perspective, body worn video is a fantastic addition to be able to allow proper scrutiny, because so often, my experience of stop and search over many years is that the way it is undertaken is more important than the outcome in many ways, and the professionals and the officers and the way that they deal with people. So we would absolutely welcome more scrutiny of that.
Sure, thank you. Thanks very much, Anne. Thank you for that. Item 14 then, PCC decisions. Michelle, pages 79 to 82.
Yes, Commissioner, in terms of decisions that you've made of public interest since the last PAB, there's been 4 areas: expansion of the mini policing scheme, which is explained at paragraph 4.2.1. So £15,000 provided to expand the initiative to a further 18 schools across South Yorkshire. The second area is around accepting external funding. You have to formally decide to do that. I'd like to see a decision where you refuse. That's in relation to 1.4 million for COVID-related and wider pressure funding. Third area was your decision to approve the appointment of Lauren Courtney as temporary Chief Constable after the departure of Stephen Watson to take up the GMP role, and pending the recruitment process. And then the final area is the use of proceeds of crime seized by the police for various worthy causes that satisfy the criteria in your grant scheme that's set out on the table, there on page 81.
Thank you very much. I don't know if anybody has any comment on those. The idea of mini police, I mean, the police look younger every day anyway to me, but this is going to be ridiculous, isn't it? Okay, anybody else with any comments on that? Tim?
No, the mini police, everywhere I've known that is set up and around the country. It's been immensely popular with schools and a real effective way to promote citizenship amongst young school children. So I just think I just make the point in the public forum, and they do say police officers are getting younger, particularly as you get to my point in service now, and you meet police officers who weren't born when I joined. I see it firsthand. It's a great scheme and one that we really welcome your support.
Well, from my previous existence, when you start marrying the people you baptised, you know that you've been going it a few years. So that is. Thank you. There weren't many police, but I was out with some primary school children before the coronavirus in part of South Yorkshire, and they had a speed gun, and they were obviously with police. Yeah. And they were flagging motorists down, and these 8-year-olds were then causing the drivers to wind their windows down, and they were giving them an earful for for speed, and they were really shaken, these people, and went off very shamefaced and in a very repentant mood. So we just need a lot of primary school children attached to 30-mile-an-hour signposts around the county, I think. Okay, thank you. I think we're nearly at the end, aren't we? Is there any other business at all? Michelle?
Commissioner, just to look ahead to the July meeting, because the work programme isn't there, it's being refreshed at the moment. There will be a focus on Rotherham District Performance Report. 2 forced performance reports are due. That's tackling crime and antisocial behaviour and fair treatment. The end of year assessment for performance, the sort of closed down report for forced performance, is being deferred to August as a result of those 2 reports coming next time. And from the OPCC side, the neighbourhood policing survey results are due to be received by you, Commissioner. So that's looking ahead to the July meeting.
Indeed. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, everybody. There's some interesting discussion in there. Thank you for those who wrote the various reports. Most grateful. Thank you.